It's my honor to speak first and to say just a few words to set the stage for today's presentation. There were several landmark events in the 1700s. 1754, we have the Albany Conference. 1776, we have the Declaration of Independence. 1783, we have the Treaty of Paris. In 1787, we have the Federal Constitutional Convention. Regarding these events, there was an uncommon common denominator. That was Dr. Benjamin Franklin, who we will be discussing today. Dr. Franklin was common in the sense that he participated in all these landmark events and that he embodied what a common man could be in America in the 18th century. But he was uncommon in that he was able to contribute to the founding of America in so many significant and diverse ways. He was truly our Renaissance man. Franklin was a printer, an author, a postmaster, a scientist, a medical doctor, a master of political satire, a politician, a diplomat, and a framer of constitutions. Benjamin Franklin was indeed an uncommon common denominator. Franklin was uncommon in several other ways involving these landmark events. If you'll permit me to slightly paraphrase Dr. Franklin, Dr. Franklin had a way and foresight to help us remember key principles of American constitutionalism. It was Dr. Franklin who reminded us that if we strive to establish security at the expense of liberty, we will not deserve either. And I would add, soon we will possess neither. Benjamin Franklin was uncommon in his way that he could end a meeting. You might recall at the Declaration of Independence, as he was signing that great document, and he spoke about the delegates needing to hang together, or they would surely hang apart. These words were most likely said with a light smile, but they must have weighed heavily on the hearts and minds of those delegates that historic day. At the Federal Constitutional Convention, it was Dr. Franklin, a great peacemaker, a great diplomat, suffering from some health challenges, who was able to end the convention in a way that strengthened the new federal constitution. Dr. Franklin reminded everyone that he was a senior member of that convention. He reminded them that there had been times when he was positive that he was right, only later to find out that he was wrong. He asked that very distinguished convention to be humble, to remember that compromise was important, and that our principles are important, but when we can compromise for the greater good, we should do so. It was Dr. Franklin who could end a meeting as well. As the delegates are going up to sign the Constitution, Dr. Franklin, you may recall, commented on the president's chair, spoke about how artists had a difficult time being able to paint and distinguish between a rising and a setting sun. And then he spoke words about how he knew that this was a rising sun, this United States of America, under the U.S. Constitution. As Dr. Franklin left the convention, he was approached by a woman who asked him, "Is the government going to be a republic or a monarchy? What have you given us, Mr. Franklin?" You might recall that our great politician, our great diplomat, responded with measure. He said, "It is a republic, madam, if you can keep it." Ladies and gentlemen, we meet here today to discuss not only Benjamin Franklin in a fantastic new book that we have coming out, but also to remember it is a republic, and I would add, it is a constitution if we can keep it. I am grateful to have this opportunity to set the stage for this fantastic event. It is now my privilege to introduce Dr. Matthew S. Holland, president of Utah Valley University. Dr. Holland was a former associate professor of political science at Brigham Young University. In fact, it is at Brigham Young University that I first met Dr. Holland. He was handsome and young those days.
Wow.
And isn't it amazing he still is? In 2005, Dr. Holland was a James Madison Fellow at Princeton University. In 2007, he published his book, Bonds of Affection, Civic Charity, and the Making of America, by George Washington University Press. In 2008, he was BYU's Civically Engaged Scholar of the Year. He went on from these accomplishments and many others that I could add as well, to become president of this fine university. I'd like to take just a moment to thank him for his support for our university, for academics here, for leading by example, for his support for constitutional studies. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Dr. Matthew S. Holland, president of Utah Valley University.
Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Griffin for that very something kind of introduction. What he didn't mention to you, this is the time of year when I get to decide year-end bonuses for all the faculty, so there may be some correlation there. I am very, very happy to be here today. This is, in some ways, the culmination of a multi-year project that's been extremely gratifying, both as a scholar and as a citizen. And so I do want to thank Dr. Griffin and his efforts here at the Center for Constitutional Studies to organize this event. And he's along with his great team here. They've done their typical excellent job in organizing and getting the word out about this. And as is evidenced by the great crowd here today. I also want to thank my colleagues, Paul Kerry and Roy Goodman, who are here, part of this project. I think we'll each probably say a word about how we came together in this project, so I won't say too much more about that, except to say it's a great honor to have them here, especially Roy, who's come from back east and brings a tremendous exhibit with him to bring a visual living artifact component to this event that I think really distinguishes it. And we appreciate you and your wife's effort to be with us and welcome you to Utah Valley University today. I'll say just a word about how this book got started, because it didn't actually start as a book. And then I'd like to say just a word about Franklin and UVU, if I might. In both cases, I think this whole moment, this event, this person, Franklin, gives us a chance to reflect on not just his life and his contribution, but also education, and especially a university education. And I'll try not to go too long, as you know, Franklin was filled with all sorts of aphoristic wisdom. One of my favorites of his is that after 3 days, both fish and visitors stink. I think the same applies to public speaking, but you've got to narrow it to maybe like 10 minutes. So we'll try to be fairly brief here. Let me say a word about the genesis, and not a complete word, because I'm anxious to also hear from my colleagues about some of the elements of how this all came together that were important and interesting to them as they are to me. But for starters, I'll just say this, that one of the great things about a university is something that doesn't often happen at a university. And that is that a university is meant to be a collection, if you will, a microcosm of the universe. It is a bringing together of all truth, light, knowledge, information. That was the founding idea of a university, that you would take people from different disciplines and from different perspectives, and you would bring them together at a place where they could converse and dialogue and share and cross-fertilize with each other in terms of their ideas and what they were learning. That really is the founding fundamental idea of a university, as opposed to a technical training center or some other form of education. And the fact of the matter is that doesn't happen as often as it should at a university. It turns out that the forces of disciplinary inertia and other things are fairly strong, and people get kind of accustomed to working and dialoguing and studying with people who are in their discipline. And that's fine at a certain level, and so at some level it has to be that way. But I think for a university to truly live up to its founding ideal, there need to, from time to time, be those moments where we stop and say, and look to our left, look to our right, look to other disciplines and say, who else can I talk to? Who else can I think through with, in terms of ideas and analysis and understanding, to get a fuller picture of what the world really looks like, what the universe looks like, and everything therein. Well, that was part of what was driving some early conversations between myself and Dr. Paul Kerry. We were colleagues at BYU, but in different disciplines. He was in the history department, I was in the political science department. But we've had a long-standing friendship ever since our undergraduate days, and several common interests and friends, and many times it was more of just a kind of a social friendship relationship, but inevitably we'd get talking about ideas. And we were thrust together in another circumstance back east at Princeton University, where we started to talk about the founding. And what came out of these conversations was that the historians, and the intellectual historians in particular, had a rich vein of scholarship about the founders. And also in the course of this conversation, as we talked about it, political philosophers, that's my field, there's a subfield of political philosophy called American political thought, where you study the ideas of the founders. In some degree of context, but a primary focus on ideas. Intellectual historians still interested in ideas, but a little more emphasis on the context. Why not bring these two branches of scholarship together to have a fuller view of what's happening with a figure like Ben Franklin? I think my colleague Paul Kerry will talk about why Franklin in particular meant something that year and in the setting where we held a conference, which was at Cambridge University. But we were dreaming big, and we thought, where could we do it? And Cambridge was one of the places that came to mind, and there are some other reasons for that. I think Dr. Kerry may say a word about that. But we said, let's bring together political philosophers and intellectual historians who typically don't talk to each other around this common theme of trying to understand Ben Franklin. And there's already been a lot of scholarship written about Franklin, but maybe by coming together, we will generate some new insights. And that's exactly what happened. So we hosted a conference in Cambridge. We brought together scholars who otherwise wouldn't have come in contact with each other, and had a series of papers and presentations. And the discussion was so stimulating and so insightful that the participants themselves said, well, this isn't enough. I mean, this has been a glorious conference, but we are excited about the ideas that have been generated here. And so at that point, Paul and I decided that we would need to take it to the next step and try to capture the essence of what was shared at this conference into a book. And these things don't happen quick. That's one thing students need to learn in the academic enterprise. Sometimes we're criticized for being slow, but the reason we're slow is because we're thorough. And there's a lot of work that has to be done to double-check arguments and to check footnotes and to make sure that the galley proofs look just right and everything is in appropriate shape. And coordinating with different scholars at different institutions, that just takes a lot of time and effort. But we went to work on that. I give Dr. Kerry great thanks for really taking the lion's share of the effort on this. It's been a collaboration from the beginning, but especially in these last couple of years, given my certain responsibilities, I really thank Dr. Kerry for his extra efforts and energy in bringing this together. So that's how we get this. Started as an idea between two friends, turns into an international conference in England, culminates in a university press publication book over the series of a couple of years. And so there are some deeply seasoned reflections on Lincoln, and excuse me, that was a Freudian slip, my other area of scholarship, on Franklin, deeply seasoned reflections. So to the students who are here, I invite you to read that in that way, that this is not something that just is half-baked, off the cuff, oh, gee whiz, let's think about Franklin. This is the reflection of seasoned scholars who've been in long dialogue, been through multiple iterations, so there is a lot for students to learn from the essays, I think, that are in this book. And that's generally true of scholarship when it's done properly and well. So with that said, let me say just a word about Franklin and Utah Valley University. If I've gone from the university writ large, let me bring it home to Utah Valley University. I think Benjamin Franklin would absolutely love Utah Valley University. And I don't say that lightly. I wouldn't. It's not like I could insert any of the founding fathers into that picture. But I do think maybe out of all of the founders, if there's a founder that would love Utah Valley University, it would be Benjamin Franklin. And let me just say quickly why. If you look at Utah Valley University's core themes and what we have said, taking our mission, what is most important to us, we talk about things like being serious. And Franklin was a very serious man. Now, sometimes this was masked. You read about masks in these essays. Franklin could project himself in different ways at different times. He had a charming, affable, sometimes playful nature to him. But behind all of that was a very studious individual, someone who read broadly, someone who traveled the world. There's this wonderful essay by a German scholar in here about when he went to Germany. This was no just some light-minded joyride for him. He was studying studiously the Holy Roman Empire and saying, what lessons could I take back from this part of the world to America. He was always learning, he was always studying, and he brought a level of excellence to everything that he did. He was known in the publishing industry for the quality of his work product. And that's just how we talk about being serious at Utah Valley University, that we're intellectually serious, that we're inquisitive, that we have high expectations of ourselves as students and faculty, but we're also professionally serious, that we strive for excellence in all that we do. And that really, I think, goes to the core of Franklin's own, if you will, academic and professional virtues. We talk about being inclusive. Franklin is the, I think, epitome of inclusiveness amongst the founders. He came out of that Philadelphia environment that was a little more open, a little more expansively open on religious and cultural issues. And he was in many respects the glue, if you will, of the founding fathers, who could welcome people on their own terms. He could talk to liberals and conservatives. He could talk to religionists and non-religionists. All were kind of welcome in Franklin's world, in the same way that we try to send those signals here at Utah Valley University, that it is a home to all, majority population, minority populations, religion, no religion, different politics, all are welcome on this campus. That's the vision Franklin had for his own life. It's the life he tried to promote in Philadelphia, and it's the life he tried to create a structure for the entire country in the way that the Constitution was set up. And then we talk about being an engaged institution. If ever there was someone committed to applied learning, it's Benjamin Franklin. He was curious, and he was always looking to figure out how things worked in the real world. It's not that he was, a formally trained scientist first and following some method. He was just an extremely curious individual who would go out and try to understand the world in a very practical way, but in a very serious way. That's engaged learning, and it's true about his politics. He wanted to learn the lessons of history and geography to bring to bear to the Constitutional Convention. He wanted to learn the lessons of electricity. He wanted to, you just go down the line, and Franklin is engaged with the world around us and focusing on that. He was at once a deeply intellectual man, but a man committed to the trades. I think his looking at UVU as a place of inclusion and access. He was always worried about the opportunities for the underprivileged, believing that at that time in the history of the world there was too much emphasis on privilege and name and hereditary claim, and he wanted people to be able to succeed on their own merits and have the opportunity to do so. He would see UVU as just that kind of place and would applaud it, a place where you can come and learn how to do auto mechanics or study philosophy. That is the essence, I think, of Franklin's intellectual outlook. It's the essence of his own life, a man who was in one hand a leather-aproned printer who knew a trade and practiced it very well, to a very sophisticated reader and understander of philosophical text and history and humanities, who was at home as easy in the courts of Paris as he was the wharves of Philadelphia. And in that sense, I think he would embrace our core values and see that our emphasis to put this ultimately on students and their success is just what a university ought to be doing today. So that's why there's more than just passing interest for me here today in having this event, having us discuss Franklin and think about him, because he is a timeless figure for so many reasons, but I think he's an especially timeless figure for what we're trying to accomplish here at UVU today. With that, I think I'll stop here and just a brief word of introduction for my good friend and colleague, Paul Kerry, my co-partner in crime in what's brought us here today. Paul is an associate professor of history at Brigham Young University and has most recently been named the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Education. Paul is a scholar's scholar. Truly. This is a man whose range is remarkable, a Carlisle scholar, something we share in common, our love of the things Scottish, but he's gone from Carlisle to Mozart to Goethe to Franklin. The range that he brings to his projects is as impressive as the quality of the output. And that's another reason that we got together. Paul has developed a very justly earned reputation at BYU and really now across the nation and even internationally, that if you want to do an academic project and you want to do it right, you get Paul Kerry involved. And he's got this ability to bring people together with insight and diplomacy, but also a real commitment to first-rate values. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Paul Kerry.
Thank you so much, President Holland. I appreciate very much being at Utah Valley University. I think he was spot on, exactly right about how Franklin would have viewed Utah Valley University. He helped to found what we now know today as the University of Pennsylvania. Now, there were other colleges and schools in existence at that time, and he said, our country needs a place where not only we could have the trades and learning in the way that President Holland just described, but we also need a place that won't necessarily be dominated by one religious tradition. You see, the other colleges had had this religious foundation, and Franklin envisioned a place where others could go of any religious persuasion, and I think that's important. So in some ways, I see our two institutions, Brigham Young University and Utah Valley University, as a binary star. The two things in the country that through the creative processes of places where people of faith can pursue learning in the way that they wish, but also people of any faith can pursue the learning in the ways that they wish, where there would be this, in a way, a creative and generative tension coming out of it. Sometimes we're not comfortable with that tension in the country. Sometimes we tend to say, I wish things could just get done in this way. And that's precisely where someone like Benjamin Franklin comes in. He is able to step in at those moments and help people to resolve these kinds of differences. I had an experience just recently, a couple of weeks ago, was at the New York Public Library. I had an appointment with one of the curators there, and he was coming a bit late to see me, and I suppose as a bit of, and I'm sorry, he said, you know, I'm a bit late, I was just with what they call a super donor, and public institutions need donations. And he said, why don't you come back with me and see this fair copy, Thomas Jefferson's fair copy of the Declaration of Independence. Now, for a historian, of course, that's like waving a red flag in front of a bull. And I was right with him, said, sure, let's go and see this. And in this fair copy, you could see the various amendments that Adams, Jefferson, Franklin, and a couple of others on the Committee of Five that came together to create this declaration and then present it to the Continental Congress. And we're not exactly sure of the roles that each person had, except for Jefferson's, which of course was the most prominent. But we see that Franklin's footprint is there. Some scholars, in fact, think that a key word, self-evident, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that Franklin wants that self-evidence there. The word had been, there had been a sacred and inalienable in this line. Franklin says, maybe self-evident. The idea that what is being proposed in the Declaration could be accessed by reason from all. You didn't have to necessarily come from a particular religious perspective to access what was being said about the equality of all people and the other great truths, of course, that are articulated in this declaration. Franklin, as President Holland said, brings people together. And that's what a university is about. He spoke that very well. President Holland and I, he was being very modest. He said, oh, we got together at Princeton. He was at Princeton. He was a visiting fellow at the James Madison program at the University of Princeton. And I was doing some research. And this happened to be fortuitous because I was at an institution, the American Philosophical Society, and also a research associate at Franklin's University of Pennsylvania, where Roy Goodman was at. So I'm sitting in the American Philosophical Society, a great institution that Franklin himself founds, the first intellectual or philosophical institution in the United States. And President Holland and I are having conversations over at Princeton, and then I could return to the American Philosophical Society and begin to speak with Roy Goodman. Roy Goodman is kind of like, I guess you could say, like, for the Franklin world, he's like St. Peter at the pearly gates. You got to go through Roy at some point. At some point, you come to the doors and there's Roy Goodman. He's connected to the whole world of Franklin scholarship. Everyone knows him. Haven't met a Franklin scholar who didn't know Roy Goodman. He, of course, has access to the primary sources by being at the American Philosophical Society, where many of Franklin's papers are. He works with the Yale University, where the Franklin edition, tremendous scholarly edition that's online, free, all of Franklin's original writings, edited and put forward on the online service through Yale. He's connected. So as this idea was formulating between President Holland and myself, I could go to Roy, who is also something of a social entrepreneur. He knows how to bring things together, like Franklin, bring people together. Now, since knowing Roy for a few years, I see what he does in Philadelphia and the role that he plays in Philadelphia. Not only was he a past president of the Friends of Franklin in Philadelphia, but in other civic institutions. Roy Goodman is there doing the good foundational work that Franklin thought was necessary to sustain the republic. It's one thing to create it, but a republic, of course, relies on people. Gordon Wood says the first law of the republic is sacrifice. You have to be willing to sacrifice, and we often think of that in martial terms. I will defend the republic with my blood, and that is indeed necessary. We are grateful for those who, in our own country, from this university, and from mine, who go out to defend the Constitution and the Republic. But there are other kinds of sacrifice, for example, and this is the civic engagement that's necessary, the production of good citizens who share common values and who hope to establish the common good. Roy does this in Philadelphia. And as Matt and I would talk about the intellectual aims, the bringing together of political thought and intellectual history, at this conference at the University of Cambridge, Roy would help to say, you do need money for this, you know? You do have to raise funds. Scholars have to be able to get to Cambridge. We wanted this as an international conference with scholars from the United Kingdom. We've even got, as he mentioned, this prominent scholar on Franklin from Germany, and of course scholars from the United States. How do you do something like that? How do you actually make something happen? This is where Roy Goodman was incredibly insightful and helpful, provided us a kind of vision of bringing institutions together, very much like Franklin would do, to make something like this happen. And in the acknowledgments page, you can see all of the many institutions that contributed, from the Franklin home, the house that Franklin lived in London, and the institution there, all the way to the institutions here in Utah, and to many others who said, we believe this is important and want to make it work. They also like to see a product, and this product, of course, is the book itself. Now, before I go on to take a few minutes just to describe something of the book, let me say that on this line of sacrifice for the Republic, along with sacrifice, many of the founders, including Franklin, believed that you needed virtue, that a republic could only be sustained based on the virtue of the people. Would the people give of themselves in sacrifice, and would they also seek this common good? Would they seek indeed to use their reason to gain access to those things that we all know, or as the scholar at Texas Austin has said, the things we can't not know, everything that we understand by reason ourselves, that we understand to be true and right and good. Another way that sacrifice can be viewed, and it's one that I think is very applicable, particularly in this county. In this county, one of the demographic statistics is, and I just read an article this very morning on Public Discourse, in which it was saying that there's a demographic challenge that's now occurring in various parts of the world. Are we going to be able to continue to produce children? Another form of sacrifice is the sacrifice that's done to sustain families. Who is it that gets up in the morning to help the child when the child cries out? Who is it that goes to serve when a child has a bad day at school? Who's there when the parent is older to help take care of that parent. James Wilson, prominent sociologist who's recently passed away, in his, I believe it's his final book, he writes about this and says how the family is the place where all of these sacrifices, all of these negotiations, all of this training, particularly in the moral world, occurs. We see that some of the other founders concurred. Adams concurred that this was foundational, that the relations between and in families were essential. So we can take some of these ideals of the founders and not just think about these things as up there or over there, but that are occurring right inside of our most intimate spaces, inside of the home. And that's where this moral education occurs. And we need to also remember that's our responsibility. Montesquieu, the most cited of all of the sources, Montesquieu and John Locke, believed that this kind of civic education had to occur and had to be passed on. So many of the founders wanted universities and educational places to be founded to pass this on. Jefferson, of course, and his founding of the University of Virginia. Many of the founders themselves went to great institutions of learning. Hence, once again, exactly what President Holland said, Utah Valley University also is a part of this founding mission, if you will. So once you bring these scholars together, how do they speak to each other? Well, at a conference, they present papers, one scholar after another, on what we call panels, similar to this. And you try to theme the panels so that people with related interests can be together. In this particular volume, you'll see that we have a historian from Franklin's University of Pennsylvania, Mike Zuckerman, very eminent historian who comments on Franklin, particularly Franklin's sense of self-fashioning. He was a person who was diplomatic, to say the very least, but who could also be, in a sense, all things to all people. Now, in some ways, that could sound very salesman-like. Certainly, there's something of the entrepreneur in Franklin who says we need to be able to come together to build things civically. He builds institutions in the city of Philadelphia that are necessary to continue to establish the republic, such as, how about a free circulating library? Where I went to school at the University of Oxford, you can still go to some of the college libraries and see the chains that hold the books to the library shelves. I'm looking out just in front of me in this beautiful room, and I see that any student, any person could come in and take a book off of the shelf. This circulation of knowledge is critically important to Benjamin Franklin. How about a place where you might take care of orphans? What happens? Is there not a role for a civic institution to assist the population in that function of taking care of the most vulnerable? But then what happens when you get bickering occurring? Oh, I would like to get the credit, or I want the credit for that, or I won't do it if my kind of people aren't the ones that are being taken care of. Franklin would step in and say, we're all going to do it. We're going to appoint, and this is actually in his autobiography, we're going to appoint a person who's a Baptist, a Church of England man, a Moravian, and others. They're going to form the board so that we work together, that the good that you all want to do according to your own religious traditions and faiths can radiate outward to the community. In a sense, a competition of the good, to take these capitalistic values that Franklin very much knew, because not only, of course, was he a leather apronman, somebody who was a printer, and not only somebody who could read the books, but he knew you had to sell the books. He was a bookseller. So he knew that knowledge had to not only be circulated, but you had to get the books onto the bookshelves in the first place. That's why the people who donate to universities are so critical. They're getting the books onto the shelves. They're getting the learned professors into the classrooms. And often, thanks to their generosity, they're getting the people, the students, into the universities. This is Franklin's vision. So Michael Zuckerman talks about this. We then have a political scientist, Jerry Weinberger, who does the same, and he says, how deep do these masks go? Franklin seems to have multiple masks, multiple ways of presenting himself. Is there a real Franklin that we can find? We've got a philosophical Franklin, Lorraine Pangle, University of Texas, Austin. She says, Franklin writes, of course, in his autobiography, I had two great poles where I received my learning, Jesus and Socrates. And she says, I'm going to look at Franklin and Socrates. What can we really learn about Franklin? and Socrates. The leather apron men. We have a professor in Scotland, very well-known professor, who has written on these leather apron men that even as Franklin rises up in wealth, he doesn't forget his origins. Doesn't that happen so often? We sometimes rise up in the world only to renounce where we came from or be embarrassed about where we came from. We want to rise above our origins, but we really shouldn't renounce that. And Franklin never does. In fact, on his grave, he said, all I want written there is, B. Franklin, printer. That's what he wanted to be known by after all of the things that he'd done, the things that we celebrate. Signing of the Declaration, signing of the Constitution, the Treaty of Paris. The fact that he could go to France and play the hayseed, right? Play the hayseed that people would underestimate, and then say, and by the way, I need enormous gobs of money to fund this war, and to have people be presenting him this money. He could have listed any of those things, including his late membership in the Society for the Abolition of Slavery, where he said, I will become president. He knew this was a sensitive issue. He'd been to the convention, the Constitutional Convention. He understood the compromise. But before he left this earthly domain, he wanted his name on that side of the ledger, and I'm going to lend my name to this. I think that's critically important. He could be many things, but in the end, he knew where he stood and where he wanted his deeper allegiances to lie, including symbolically as a model for the rest of the country. You could say that movement was his last political act on the national stage. We've got a scholar from Penn State University, Carla Mulford, an English professor, who says Franklin, who is one of the last of the American founders to actually want to declare for independence. It's as late as 1775, and he's still thinking, could we not make this work? And she shows how he ultimately questions, what are the ends of empire? What are the ends of empire? To which end should we create a foundation for the British Empire? And is that working? Does the empire care for who we are? And just in closing, just to make sure that we touch on everyone, I've mentioned Professor Newman, the Scottish scholar. We also have Professor Neil York. Fascinating episode. When Franklin is negotiating in Paris, the British see this is earnest. This is very, very earnest. They might just do it. They might just break away. And they send, this is a mysterious episode now, somebody is sent. We're not quite sure who sends this person, but we think it goes right back to the highest levels of the British monarchy, sends what we call it today a spy to Franklin, drops a note through the gates where the Americans are staying, Adams and Franklin, basically says, wouldn't you want to rethink this? Isn't there a way that you could rethink it? The person uses a pseudonym, Weissenstein, says, wouldn't you want to rethink? We can make this work. Stay in. And Professor Neil York talks about this. Doug Thomas from Graphic Design, a graphic designer himself, so fittingly writes about Franklin as printer, and how for Franklin this wasn't just important as a way of material existence, but also for a way to think metaphorically. How do you lay out print? What are the different fonts that are there? How does print allow us to see the world? And he writes about this. So the book touches on a variety of subjects, ones that we hope are new, refreshing, ones that would be provocative, maybe even to some degree inspiring. Thank you so much for having me here, for hosting me so generously. Thank you, Dr. Griffin, Director of the Constitutional Studies Center here, one that I've looked to with amazement and admiration. I'm so pleased that it's here at Utah Valley University, so pleased that the resource is here. I'm hopeful that we can continue as two universities to be this binary star. In fact, tomorrow I look forward to our university hosting one of the professors from UVU who's going to be talking to us and teaching us. So thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Kerry and President Holland. We will now hear from our third guest. But before we do, I would like to just speak in a very sincere way to the students of the center who have worked so hard to put on this event. Would you please join me in giving them a round of applause? We will now have the introduction for our next guest, Roy E. Goodman, by Brooke Shorter, the Events Committee Co-Chair for the Center for Constitutional Studies. Brooke?
Thank you, Dr. Griffin, Dr. Kerry, and President Holland for your remarks. Like Dr. Griffin said, my name is Brooke Shorter, and I am the co-chair of the Events Committee and a teaching assistant for one of Dr. Griffin's classes. It is my privilege to introduce Roy E. Goodman, our final speaker this morning. Mr. Goodman has a Bachelor of Arts from the Pennsylvania State University and a Master of Science in Library and Information Services from Drexel University and a Master of Arts in American Civilization from the University of Pennsylvania. He was a reference librarian at the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia for 20 years before becoming curator of printed materials at the Society in 1992. Mr. Goodman was the former president of Friends of Franklin, an organization dedicated to promoting fellowship, learning, and the spirit of Benjamin Franklin. He was also featured in the trailer for the popular movie National Treasure. Mr. Goodman has contributed to many writings on Franklin, including Benjamin Franklin's Intellectual World. Mr. Goodman has also lectured extensively on the legacy of Benjamin Franklin. Please join me now in welcoming Roy E. Goodman.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank Rick Griffin and his very accessible and curious staff, very capable staff, and certainly President Holland and Dr. Kerry. I should give a little bit of background on a broader aspect of this book and the conference. 2006 marked the tercentenary, the 300th anniversary of Franklin's birth. And of all places, we'd expect France and America to have a big centennial celebration. They did do things, but England, of all places, would not entertain having a Franklin conference. Various people in Philadelphia who organized the Traveling Franklin Show, which went to places as far west as Denver and Houston, Atlanta, St. Louis, Philadelphia, of course, and then later in Paris. But the English weren't interested in Franklin, so I have to commend both President Holland and Paul Kerry for using that Utah know-how and spirit. And one of Franklin's descendants, a BYU alum, Mark Skousen, who has actually finished Franklin's autobiography for him, for getting the conference together and doing such a remarkable job. On behalf of Franklin, let me say, as Franklin mentions, either write something worth reading or do something worth writing, and on this occasion, our panel certainly has done both. I'd also like to thank Ambassador Baktibek Abdurisev and his wife for showing my wife and I some of your beautiful local areas. Hopefully we'll get back and see southern Utah at some point. And I know Franklin would certainly like to be here. He'd probably be swimming in the lake across the way or skiing. We have to remember that Franklin was a very physical person. We always think of the old Franklin. What we've tried to do in the exhibit upstairs is show the young and vital Franklin, the Franklin who's in the International Swimmers Hall of Fame, who suggested physical fitness be part of every curriculum, and certainly would have been very proud to look at the beautiful campus here, not having to go out into the bad weather, of course, very, very handy, and getting a good exercise and coming from one part of the campus to the other, all through the one structure of the building. So that's just a little bit of introduction on my part. But now about the American Philosophical Society. It's an eminent scholarly organization of international reputation. The APS promotes useful knowledge in the sciences and humanities through excellence in scholarly research, professional meetings, publications, library resources, and community outreach. This country's first learned society, the APS has played an important role in American cultural and intellectual life for over 250 years. The first drudgery of settling new colonies is now pretty well over, wrote Benjamin Franklin in 1743, and quote, "There are many in every province and circumstances that set them at ease and afford leisure to cultivate the finer arts and improve the common stock of knowledge." The scholarly society he advocated became a reality that year. By 1769, international acclaim for its accomplishments assured its permanence. Franklin's influence and needs of American settlements led the society in its early years to pursue equally all philosophical experiments that let light into the nature of things, tend to increase the power of man over matter, and multiply the conveniences or pleasures of life. Early members included doctors, lawyers, clergymen, and merchants interested in science, and also many learned artisans and tradesmen like Franklin. Many founders of the Republic were members: George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, who also served as president of the Philosophical Society, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Paine, Benjamin Rush, James Madison, and John Marshall, as were many distinguished foreigners, Lafayette, von Steuben, and General Kosciuszko. In the 18th century, natural philosophy, the study of nature, comprised the kinds of investigations now considered scientific and technical. Members of the American Philosophical Society encouraged America's economic independence by improving agriculture, manufacturing, and transportation. Greatly contributing to the Society's international fame was its participation in astronomical observations of the 1760s. With one of his telescopes erected on a platform behind the State House, now Independence Hall, David Rittenhouse plotted the transit of Venus, thus attracting the recognition of the scholarly world. Francis Hopkinson, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and Samuel Vaughan, a recent immigrant, led the revival of the society after the Revolution. In 1780, Pennsylvania had granted a charter guaranteeing that the APS might correspond with learned individuals and institutions of any nation or country on its legitimate business at all times, whether in peace or war. The state also deeded to the society a portion of present-day Independence Square, on which is erected our original building, Philosophical Hall, which Franklin actually visited before his death in 1790. It was completed in 1789. The enlightened terms of the Society's charter and the location of Philosophical Hall adjacent to the seat of government clearly illustrate how closely the new nation linked learning and freedom, regarding each as the support and protection of the other. Until about 1840, the APS, though a private organization, fulfilled many functions of a National Academy of Science, National Library and Museum, and even a patent office. Accordingly, chiefs of staff, cabinet officers, and presidents often consulted the society. Jefferson and other members of the society instructed Lewis and Clark concerning the scientific, linguistic, and anthropological aspects of their impending exploration of the Louisiana Territory. Unfortunately, they didn't come through Utah, but they should have, that's for sure. The society served as the prototype of a number of other learned societies and gave birth to specialized organizations for agriculture, chemistry, and history. For many years, the Society's hall provided space for the University of Pennsylvania, which, by the way, your former governor, Huntsman, is an alum. And we recently had, as a Franklin celebration event in January, Governor Huntsman speak on diplomacy, one of Franklin's favorite areas of interest. And he was well received, and it was nice having that link between Utah and Philadelphia continue here with this very fine assemblage and exhibit upstairs. In the latter half of the 19th century, the Society's interests were chiefly in the areas of American paleontology, geology, astronomical and meteorological observations, and American Indian ethnology. The status of the APS is reflected in its membership. John J. Audubon, Robert Fulton, Charles Darwin, Thomas Edison, Alexander von Humboldt, and Louis Pasteur, just to name a few early members, are among the names of its members. Albert Einstein, Robert Frost, George C. Marshall, and Linus Pauling hint at the scientific, humanistic, and public accomplishments of 20th century members. The Society first elected a woman in 1789, the Russian Princess Dashkova, president of the Imperial Academy of Sciences in St. Petersburg. Elizabeth Cabot Carey, Agassiz, Marie Curie, and Margaret Mead are among other women elected. Vital new directions for research, meetings, and publications were implemented in the 1930s thanks to major gifts by R.A.F. Penrose, a mining engineer who, in the neighboring state of Colorado, amassed quite a fortune and was very generous in funding many of our projects. They included scientific endeavors and such as excavation of Tikal, Guatemala, and more modest grants for a variety of projects, including scholarly books and articles. The publications program, which had maintained a journal and monograph series, added a book series, the memoirs, and a yearbook. The Philosophical Society is the oldest learned publisher with its transactions, and one of the CCS staff was talking about our website and reading about all the agricultural things we had. And in fact, if you look at the early writings of our society, many agricultural improvements were included. So we think of philosophical in terms other than useful knowledge, but that was Franklin's intention. By 1981, the APS expanded activities, necessitating the purchase of a third building. So we have a campus, and sort of to paraphrase Franklin, you have a campus if you can keep it. As you know, I see the cranes being active today, and they're building more and more buildings. It's a real challenge to, in a digital world, to access space and information. In addition to recognizing superior accomplishments by election and membership, the Society awards special prizes and medals. Established in 1786, the Magellanic Premium, named after a descendant of the famous explorer, established a prize relating to navigation, astronomy, or natural philosophy. It's the oldest scientific prize given by an American institution. And people recently, women working on various astronomical and physics of space travel have received awards. The people responsible for GPS have received awards. So you could look at our website and see some of these recipients. It's quite interesting. There are other medals and awards for distinguished achievement in the arts, humanities, or social sciences, the Jefferson Medal. And we have a program to promote exploration in many areas named after our Lewis and Clark founders. Election to the APS is honorary and is in the fields of mathematical and physical sciences, biological sciences, social sciences, humanities, and the arts professions and leaders in public and private affairs. Recently, people like Scorsese, the director, Martin Scorsese, and Woody Allen were elected. We have meetings twice a year, and hopefully they'll come and speak. We have other many Nobel Prize members. In fact, as of April last year, the APS had 1,022 members. There are 847 resident members and 175 international members. And there is a member from Utah, a biologist from the University of Utah. I don't know if he's ever come to a meeting, and I certainly have never met him. But anyway, hopefully you'll visit our website, and when you come to Philadelphia, you'll come to see some of the wonderful treasures we have in our lobby that's open and free to the public. And just briefly, running a little over here, but the library where I work is a research institution. We have over 400,000 printed items, 11 million manuscript items. We have a lot on the West. We have a lot on Native Americans. And we even know that Franklin, certainly in his interest in the West, had maps which describe Spanish and French and Russian maps describing this part of the world. So if you look at the Franklin papers online, which you'll be able to see upstairs as part of the exhibit, you can query Franklin's writings and learn what he knew about the West. Of course, of all places, his most famous writing, the autobiography, resides in the West at the Huntington Library in California. And I've even joked about Franklin being the first Californian interested in hot tubs and swimming and fine food and good weather. He's with us today in spirit, and certainly when you go upstairs, I know you're going to find the exhibit very interesting. And the digital world made that exhibit very possible. Franklin would have loved the access to information, of course. As a printer, he produced many things in replica. Just think of how much ease he would have had with Google and Dropbox and all the others to make things so much more convenient and meeting a broad range of people. So the one wonderful thing we have, thanks to the internet and digital technology, is Franklin's copy of the Constitution, which you'll see, a digital copy displayed upstairs prominently. As far as I know, it's never been shown in all 6 pages of the Dunlap printing in its entirety. And even our own website, which has lots of digital images, does not have anything other than the first page. So if you get upstairs, make sure you get to see that, as well as a number of the other pop culture images. We tried to make Franklin in our ephemeral collection that Sherry Bufano and I have put together and traveled around more accessible. We like to see Franklin, the young Franklin, the vital Franklin, the Franklin that would have come to UVU and spoke to you and shared stories, and certainly been happy he wouldn't have to pay a very high tuition, which he would have done if he were alive today at either Penn State or Penn, universities that associate themselves with him. Well, thank you again. This is a wonderful event, and I look forward to meeting you upstairs and having opportunities to chat with you, and coming back to Utah and inviting you to Philadelphia and sharing some of our cheesesteaks and other goodies, and maybe meeting Roy Halladay, another one of our fine Franklin fans and member of LDS. Paul tells me that. He knows Mr. Halladay pretty well. So thank you again. This has been wonderful.